This year in film, Lon Channey walks around with his knees in metal buckets for our entertainment. Douglas Fairbanks becomes the first superhero and ties the knot with superstar Mary Pickford. The German Expressionist movement heats up, and the Maxwell Motor Company unlocks the power of product placement. This is Journey Through Cinema, where we take a look back at every year in film, notable cinematic achievements, awards, and the films worth remembering. On March 14th, Alice Guy Blanche releases her final film, Tarnished Reputations, starring Dolores Casino and Alan Roscoe. Alice Guy Blanche would leave her mark on cinema as the first ever female director. She was also one of the first directors ever to make a narrative film with The Fairy Cabbage, all the way back in 1896. She is also one of the first directors to have an all-African-American cast in 1912's A Fool and His Money. She leaves her mark as a legend of cinema. On March 28th, two of the three biggest actors of all time, Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford, would be married, becoming the first major Hollywood power couple. They would together build their mansion in Beverly Hills and nickname it Pickfair. This would become a major central hub for the entertainment industry, where all the pretty rich people got to get together and kind of rub elbows. May 10th saw the release of The Flapper from director Alan Crosland and starring Olive Thomas. The Flapper movement of the 1920s was a major shift in female youth culture. Women started to wear shorter skirts, sometimes up to their knees, and just, oh no, think of the scandals. They also started to wear their hair up in bobs, and they started to listen to that damn satanic music. Nothing more evil than jazz, I'll tell you that. This film was one big parody and cautionary tale of the dangers and horrors of the movement. This is basically the equivalent of, a bunch of old farts just shaking their fist at the younger generation and saying, "We'll show you the error of your ways." But culture marches on, ever-changing in both lifestyle and technology. One such piece of technology included the automobile, and this was featured as just one of the first major brazen pieces of product placement. Nell Shipman released Something New. The movie Something New. That was the movie. The title of the movie is Something New. This is a film that sees a young woman kidnapped by a gang while her brain-dead suitor stupidly drives his Maxwell automobile, not built for off-roading, I will say. It has basically no suspension. Anyways, he drives that out into the wilderness to rescue her, while everyone rightfully laughs at him for just being an idiot. And this isn't a comedy, by the way. I mean, it feels like it should be, as we watch this just rickety bucket of bolts trying to drive over boulders and down canyons, stalling multiple times. This is all basically supposed to be one big advertisement, and it's not a very good one. However, it is an interesting little window into how company branding would later merge with film financing. In August, producer Jack Cohen, Joe Brandt, and Harry Cohen would form CBC Film Sales, which would become Columbia Pictures. November 27th would see the release of an early blockbuster, The Mark of Zorro, which would catapult Douglas Fairbanks from being a largely comedic actor into an action legend and king of the Swashbucklers. This solidified Zorro as one of his most iconic roles and lined him up for other such action adventures as The Three Musketeers in 1921 and Robin Hood in 1922. But the big moves within the cinematic landscape for this year, for once they weren't happening in Hollywood, but rather overseas, starting in Russia. Here, experimental filmmaker Lev Kuleshov demonstrated his short film that would later be dubbed the Kuleshov Effect. The video, it's simple. It shows a man with a passive expression, then cuts to an image such as food, or an image of like a girl in a coffin, then back to the passive face. What Kuleshov discovered was the relationship between audience psychology and two separate shots. If you showed two separate images juxtaposed against one another, the audience would create meaning between the two shots. In his experiment, viewers said when they saw the food that the man looked hungry. However, when they swapped it out and put in the dead girl, they said he looked like he was grieving. All despite the man's expression never changing. This concept would revolutionize editing techniques through the years as various artists played with how to cut between different objects and scenes and assign emotional value with the audience. Though film had been slowly evolving away from a fixed camera, stage-like feel, this would open the door for countless films to find a new rhythm in their editing style and really be able to tap into actor performance, all while providing new emotional context. This was priceless in the silent era, where information had to be conveyed without any spoken word. But moving from Russia to Germany, we find the Expressionist movement has fully hit its stride in this year. The Expressionist movement was not just isolated to films, but rather across many art forms. It could be found in such images as The Scream, or plays like Spring's Awakening, or the poetry of Ernst Sadler. It was an art form rooted in subjectivity rather than objective realism. In the context of film, we did not see the world as it is, but rather how a character viewed it. During World War I, known as the Weimar? I always forget they pronounce it with a V. I don't speak German, sorry. The German government would swoop in to take control over the many independent studios within the country and consolidate them into their propaganda machine, known as UFA. While this whole process sounds a little harsh, and I'm sure the people who lost their studios weren't all jazzed about it, it actually allowed German cinema to survive the war better than most of the rest of Europe. Europe was pretty well scarred from the war. While the other countries, they really had to rely on exported films from America, Germany was able to ramp up local production and really limit artistic imports from other countries. Unfortunately, this also meant that the UFA had control over what could and could not be produced, which is going to prove a much bigger problem in the future. Fast forward to the 1920s, and smaller studios were starting to re-emerge in Germany, but struggled to compete with the larger UFA. One such studio was Decla. With a more limited budget, filmmakers tried to lean in on surrealism over big-budget spectacle. One of Decla's biggest claims to fame would be The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Though it wasn't the first movie to embrace the Expressionist style, it was perhaps the best example of how it worked and why it became so popular. But more on that in a little while. A big part of the Expressionist movement was really located within mise en scène. This is quite literally translated to placing on a stage. It's how physical objects are composed within a frame. Film in this movement adopted sharp or wavy edges, lopsided architecture, and a warping of scale. They had exaggerated shadows or bold otherworldly patterns. This was not supposed to be a realistic portrait of the surroundings. This was supposed to express the character's unstable mental state and emotions. And for something like Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, it even works as a sort of foreshadowing for the unreliable perspective of the main character. Really, for small studios like Decla, it was great because they got around having to make things look really real because they weren't supposed to look real. So what began as an attempt to cut costs gave way to a completely new artistic expression, an art form born out of limitations. It became popular due in part to the German people going through a period of just intense self-reflection with their loss in World War I. Their economy was in shambles, and they were angry and poor. All of that usually isn't a great combination for mental health. The Expressionist movement, it really was a fitting outlet for their natural anxieties. You'll find it in such films as F.W. Murnau's Nosferatu from 1922, a film made with the exact intention of drawing parallels to the unstoppable and suffocating nature of death, especially during wartime. However, in this case, the movie kind of became more associated with the Spanish flu. Another case where even if a creator means one thing, people can take a completely different meaning from it, and maybe even a more powerful one. It relied on extreme shadows, use of dark spaces, and exaggerated makeup to more theatrically show the dour declining mental state of all the characters. Another great example of this movement is in The Golem, which saw the Jewish people rightfully looking for protection at a period of heightened persecution. It begins with prediction of doom and ends with all the characters turning to the help of a, stone giant born of a demon for salvation. Many of these movies are in my top picks for a reason. This style reflected the general nervous feeling that everything was not quite right. Eventually, the movement would find its way across to America. As the Second World War neared, the UFA would try to recruit Fritz Lang as the head of the studio. But instead, he quite wisely decided he was going to flee the country to Hollywood, where aspects of the movement could be found in his magnum opus, Metropolis. And Expressionism has lived on in America, becoming a major influence on the birth of the crime noir genre, as well as being incorporated into early horror, such as a lot of the Universal Monster series. From high art to genre pastime, from something like Tim Burton's Batman and Edward Scissorhands, to Ridley Scott's Alien and Blade Runner. You can even find it in Guillermo del Toro's Pan's Labyrinth. Traces of this movement and its influence are still very much alive today. The highest-grossing film of the 1920s was Way Down East, from D.W. Griffith. I covered this movie in its own video, so be sure to check it out. It would be a major financial gamble for Griffith as the budget ballooned thanks to the expensive rights of Lottie Blair Parker's original play. It paid off though, as the movie racked up nearly $4.5 million, making it the fourth highest grossing movie of the entire silent era, and it would become Griffith's last major mega hit. Other notable big moneymakers from the year would be, of course, The Mark of Zorro, Ernst Lubitsch's Madame de Barry, and more infidelity dramas from Cecil B. DeMille, including Why Change Your Wife and Something to Think About, both starring Gloria Swanson. A classic pairing. And this brings us to my top picks for 1920. These are my picks for the best or most significant movies of the year. As always, there's going to be varying levels of spoilers as we go over them. So, that's your fair warning. First, we have The Penalty, from director Wallace Worsley, and starring Lon Channey. Lon Channey was a man who for years struggled outside the studio system as a character actor, before finding prominence as a performer willing to undergo physical transformation, as in sitting in a makeup chair for hours on end. We were unable to cover Lon Chaney's breakout film from 1919, mostly on account of that movie being lost to time. But The Miracle Man became the highest grossing film of that year. So we're gonna have to take this one as a consolation prize. And it's not a bad one. Lon Chaney's Blizzard may be one of the great forgotten villains of cinema. The movie follows a young artist who's commissioned to do a sculpture of the devil. She undergoes a lengthy audition process until she finds a perfect model in a double amputee. But he ends up being a little too perfect. The film pulls back the layers on their relationship as Lon Chaney's Blizzard is revealed as a mob man out for revenge on the man who botched his surgery. Channey is outright fantastic in the role, committed completely to the physicality that it requires, whether that be in his wild facial expressions or the hours and hours he was required to walk on his knees in metal buckets, with his legs uncomfortably tied up behind him. And it's honestly a pretty convincing effect, one that understandably Channey blamed for his knee problems later in life. Yet despite all the big, grand acting moments, it is the quiet calm of the character that makes him so memorable. He's a man wallowing in his misery and committed to spreading it to everyone he can. Though the ending can feel like a bit of a cop-out, the movie is a great portrait of what made Channey so popular and how he could just throw himself into roles at the cost of his own body. Channey would later become known as the Man of 1,000 Faces, and The Penalty is a great look at his early appeal and how he could make himself nearly unrecognizable with even the smallest amount of makeup. So if you're looking for a great silent character from a great silent actor, check this one out. Number 6, Within Our Gates. We've talked quite a bit about Oscar Micheaux on this series, but we have yet to cover really any of his movies. And for those new or unfamiliar, Oscar Micheaux opened one of the first black studios in Hollywood and earned the moniker the first black director, or the great black auteur. And while being the first black filmmaker may not technically be correct, he is the first major African-American filmmaker. Unfortunately, Micheaux's first film, The Homesteader, is like many, lost to time. You get to hear that a lot on this channel. And it really is a shame. And hopefully one day all of them can be rediscovered. Though Micheaux would direct or produce around 44 movies, most of his earliest silent films were poorly preserved. Kind of for obvious reasons. He was a small studio, and not a lot of work was put into preserving his stuff just due to the racial tensions of the time. This leaves Within Our Gates as a unique look into the appeal of the director and his early stylings. On the surface level, Within Our Gates seems to be a fairly mundane slice-of-life film that relies predominantly on the melodrama of the characters and their relationships. It is important to remember that when you watch most silent films from this time, or really, let's be honest, from any time during the silent era, most African-American actors were widely relegated to bit roles, where they were left lingering in the background as waiters or part of the household staff. And that's when the producers were feeling generous enough to, actually hire black people rather than just putting a bunch of white extras in blackface. The reason why this movie makes the list is Micheaux's commitment to presenting the authentic black experience of the 1910s. His characters were not dealing with cartoonish racism. Instead, they dealt with something all the harder, the long game, the daily life realities that racism brought, a world where they fought tooth and nail for basic school funding, a chance at education, and an honest day's wage. Yet it was all treated with a sense of nonchalant acceptance, like some reoccurring and tiresome hurdle that constantly had to be leapt over. It was the world they lived in, a world of short change and open bigotry that just contributed to an everyday cycle of cynical calculations. What has to be given, what can be earned. Even church offered limited solace as another source of segregation, led by a priest of questionable morals who is all too willing to sell his congregation downriver. But even with that, dirty priest, the strength of faith still prevails as people retreat to religion as salvation in positive spiritualization, all in the face of it maybe being presented as another controlling institution. Despite this dour world painted by Micheaux, he never loses focus on the people living in it. It is a setting, not the focal point of the story. He balances this historical portrait against very honest character types. I'm not going to pretend here that Within Our Gates is some narrative powerhouse. It's not. And like many silent films, it can feel like the pacing drags and it's moving like molasses. But this is just still so notable for being honest. A window to another experience that seems less like the swingin' 20s and more like a culture that's just trapped in amber and waiting. It is a voice from a minority group that this time desperately needed it. And Micheaux? Yeah, he was one of the few who was able to deliver. Number 5, Way Down East. We already covered this film on another video, so I'm not really going to spend much time here. I welcome you to go back and check it out. There is a lot to be said about the complicated history of D.W. Griffith. His infamy with Birth of a Nation, his confusing self-examination in Intolerance, and then his more nuanced take on race relations in The Broken Blossom. It is often hard to reconcile the many different versions of this man. Never more so than in this film, that sees him take on hypocritical gender roles that allows men at this time period to cheat and be welcomed back into polite society, while a girl loses her virginity and is exiled from society. By combining Lottie Blair Parker's brilliant script and using his veteran knowledge of the visual language, he creates a touching tale around one of the best performances ever by Lillian Gish. She plays a woman with a full, rich character arc, as she begins as this naive child who sees life as one big Cinderella story, then finds herself conned into a sham wedding, has to contend with the loss of her first child, and then is forced to face her abuser every single day, only then to find where her breaking point really is. Please be sure to check out that full review. Number 4. The Buster Keaton Short Collection. Buster Keaton was already a big name by 1920. Born as a child of the stage, he would perform as part of his family's vaudeville act, which was called The Three Keatons. When he met Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle, his entire career changed. He was hired on as a minor role in The Butcher Boy. However, he kinda ended up stealing the entire show. And so started a long friendship between the two that saw Buster Keaton become something of a sidekick or wingman to Arbuckle's headline shows. It wasn't long though before he was promoted up to co-star. He was the perfect counter to Arbuckle. Where Fatty used his weight and exaggerated expressions to draw laughs, Keaton relied on his scrawny nimbleness and stoic stone face. He mixed in some thrilling stunt work and always had the conventional pratfall. Yet Keaton's career up until this point was always within this dual act, riding on Arbuckle's much bigger name. This was the year where Keaton finally broke free, spread his wings, and got to fly. He would have 4 big hit movies: 1 Week, The Scarecrow, Neighbors, and Convict 13. In all of them, he would quickly prove he had what it took to be a leading man. He was able to bring both the laughs and the action. He had an eye for the visual language and was able to create easy, simple-to-follow stories, ones that relied on him bounding around like a character who jumped out of a Looney Tunes short. For his first film, 1 Week, Keaton wanted something that would be dynamite, and this ended up being one of the best shorts of the entire silent era, certainly one of the best I watched. It's got this stunt house that's used as this prop in a series of broad slapstick sequences. It's got some pretty impressive stunts and killer production design. The story follows 1 week of a newlywed couple played by Keaton and Sybil Seeley. Sybil Seeley. Man, they really like tongue twister names, don't they, at this time? Anyways, they're attempting to fix up their dream home. The construction project quickly goes off the rails, with scenes of sinking trampoline floors, tornadoes spinning the entire house like a top, and all of it culminating with the poor couple learning they built their house on the wrong lot. This leads to them trying to lift it out of the foundations and drive it across the entire town. This is just purely DUI gone wrong. All of it is very fast-paced, fun, and Keaton certainly made sure that he had a very visually engaging script before he ever set the cameras rolling. He made the money for his debut really count. It's a script that perfectly plays on his physicality and commits to a blowout climax, one that has a train that literally obliterates the house on the tracks. This is a must-watch essential from the Keaton library. And his other offerings from this year, they're nothing to pass up either. The Scarecrow also implements a fun trick house, but kind of on a smaller scale, with silverware and condiments hanging from strings and hidden compartments with hidden tables and, ejector chutes, I guess. I'll put it that way. It's maybe not as big budget, but it had just as much creativity. Convict 13, meanwhile, has a very good argument why you should never give Keaton a chain mace. This story has a very simple mistaken identity plot, where a clueless golfer is mistaken for an escaped inmate and is forced to survive the many comedy mishaps of our justice system. This simple setup leads to some great visual gags, like a hangman noose replaced with a stretchy exercise cord, or a bonkers climax that sees Keaton take out an entire prison yard while wielding a tetherball. The last film on the list, Neighbors, is leaning in on Keaton's absurdist romantic comedies. This was a mainstay of his while he was with Arbuckle. It's your standard boy meets girl, boy tries to get girl, and hijinks ensue. It's not really breaking any new ground, but has some of Keaton's most creative stunt work, such as the rotating paddle fence that he uses to punish his rivals, or what I think is one of his finest third acts. It's a scene that sees Keaton's bride, again played by Seeley, locked upstairs by her parents so she can't marry him. So how does he rescue her? Well, by playing a game of live-action Super Mario Bros. He stacks up 3 men like Goombas, and then he uses them to go running through platformer-esque levels with scaffolding and leaping over fences until he finally reaches the 3-story tall building. Absolutely brilliant choreography. Just good stuff. Lots of people see Chaplin's classics, but they make the critical error of passing up Buster Keaton. Don't make the same mistake. He is a cinema staple for a reason. Number 3. The Mark of Zorro. Most people on this channel, they know I'm pretty into comic book movies and superhero films, which makes it all the more fascinating to visit the birthplace of the genre. Contrary to popular belief, the genre did not begin with Superman in 1978. That's a little late, and we already proved in an earlier video that Judix had some major influence on the genre, but is far too similar to crime thrillers. It was nearly there, but it was just missing a few key ingredients. No, I'm gonna say the real birthplace of superhero cinema would have to be with Douglas Fairbanks and The Mark of Zorro, a movie that fully captures the spirit of everything people love about the genre. It's got the secret identity, the cape and cowl, the unnatural skills, a rich philanthropist by day and crime fighter by night. Zorro is the staple of the American superhero. Well, maybe missing the only one thing, which is, superpowers. Almost there. And he's brought to life by the boundless joy and energy of Douglas Fairbanks. Zorro is Spanish for fox, and Fairbanks embodies the good-natured crime-fighting prankster with all his craftiness, but also has the physical prowess to back it all up in the action scenes. The script here, it's really nothing to write home about, and it's nothing all that complicated. But it is fun to see the high-energy sword fights and see the normal superhero cliches at work in 1920. Fairbanks really does have this duality between Zorro and Don Diego that really wouldn't be matched until Christopher Reeves nearly 50 years later. You get the mustache-twirling villain who is made out as a buffoon. You get the love interest who is absolutely clueless and more interested in the man in the mask rather than, the person who's actually behind it. You get rousing speeches that inspire people to greatness, and the hero leaving behind his mark as a sign of inspiration. It is the full ingredients of the superhero film, I'm telling ya. Again, just missing superpowers. But if Batman, who was, actually inspired by Zorro, gets a pass, I think we can throw the original a bone. I still plan to do a full review on The Mark of Zorro, but decided to wait until Son of Zorro, which is a sequel starring Fairbanks, so I could pair them together. If you'd like to see that, be sure to let me know in the comments down below, and subscribe. As it stands, Mark of Zorro is really a highly recommended watch for genre fans, especially ones like me who really do like the superhero genre. But beyond that, it's also notable for completely changing the trajectory of Douglas Fairbanks' career, as he leaned into these sorts of roles in the future and became one of Hollywood's first true action stars. Moving on to number 2, The Golem. The Golem is one of the finest examples of the Expressionist movement, but even more so, it's one of the few examples of a third film being the strongest in a trilogy. And even more so than that, it is also one of the best prequels ever made. We already touched a little bit on how it leaned into that German Expressionism movement, but we haven't gone into how the film is rooted in Germanic Jewish culture. The Golem is based on a novel from 1915 from Gustav Meyrink, featuring the animated stone giant from Jewish folklore. The first film in the trilogy would be in 1915 with The Golem, or The Monster of Fate, as it was called in the US. This was meant to be a more modern-day take on the legend. Modern day for the time. Most of this movie is, unfortunately, like many, say it again, lost to time. The film was popular enough, though, that they would follow it up with this comedic parody. So stand back, Sam Raimi and Evil Dead. You're a little late to the party. Groovy. However, the director, Wegner, he really wasn't happy with the final version of the film from 1915. He never felt like he did the story justice and wanted to make something more directly true to the legend that he had heard while filming The Student of Prague. He decided to base the Jewish ghettos of the film on the ghettos of Prague and made the call to make the next film a prequel set in medieval times, an origin story of sorts. I've seen many movies in this journey be categorized as horror, but this is the first film that maybe is true full-blown horror in the traditional sense. It's committed to actually scaring the audience. It has otherworldly sets, theatrical acting, and this underlying theme of tampering with forces you don't understand. The film follows a rabbi who foretells of great doom. With his people facing persecution and exile, the rabbi builds a clay monster called a golem and calls on the demon Astaroth to give it life. You can find a lot of parallels here to the story of Frankenstein, but with stronger themes of embracing evil to find salvation. The rabbi is looking to create a force for good, but in doing so, he makes a misunderstood monster. At first, the Golem does do as intended. It defends its people. But as those controlling him act with increasing selfishness, Astaroth is allowed to take control and turns him into an unstoppable juggernaut of stone. The scenes of the demon being summoned are eerie and unsettling, shot on a green color tint with shockingly good composite work for that time. It's very easy to imagine audiences in the 1920s being spooked by the uncanny gothic sets and demonic visuals. The movie's spooky mysticism may, on the surface level, almost border on the anti-Semitic, if not for the sympathetic portrayal of the main characters. All of them are acting at times selfish, but always wanting what is best for their people. However, it's in the fallible characters that the movie is at its best, as the Golem is a tool of both destruction and salvation, a stone protector or destroyer, one that becomes all the more devilish by the greed of whoever commands it. This is a great piece of German Expressionism, a great look at early fantasy and horror, and it's all wrapped up in a story that sends a warning that really does ripple through time. And with that, we come to my number one film of the year, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. And this one should come as no surprise. If I was to name the most iconic or famous film from the silent era, Caligari would be a strong contender. The movie follows Francis, who goes to a fair where a hypnotist named Caligari uses an entranced sleepwalker to murder his buddy. Francis begins to investigate Caligari to expose him as the man behind a string of recent stabbings. This all leads him down a rabbit hole of supernatural insanity. This is a movie, more than any other, that really shows off the appeal of Expressionism. It has sets that feature jagged edges and a surrealist sense of scale, and it has makeup that is supposed to look like a fixed emotional state rather than being left to actor subtleties. It's exaggerated, like something you'd see on stage, meant to convey emotions to viewers who maybe are all the way at the back of an auditorium. Here, it serves another purpose. It's trying to create emotions that contort, that feel unnatural. Nothing in this movie is supposed to feel quite right. That's because our point of view in the movie is from a character who we're told to trust, only for the story to then reveal him as a treacherous narrator. And all of this just culminates in one of the finest twists of early cinema, one that reveals we've been lied to. This world is a complete fabrication within Francis' head, as he is really a mental patient within the asylum. Even without this twist, this movie would have worked as a psychological thriller, but it's in this twist that all the individual elements are really pulled together. Without it, the world of Caligari is just another film with over-stylized sets and spinning patterns meant to bewilder or astonish. But in the experienced hands of director Robert Wine, the twist transforms that mise-en-scène to become integral to the story. Everything we're looking at on screen is a point of view that has been twisted by insanity. Without that ending, this is just a cool-looking movie with this gripping, horror-tinged aesthetic. With it, though, it transforms into a melodramatic, unforgettable psychological drama, one that remains a major influence on modern cinema. And that's all I got for this year in 1920. Have you seen any of these movies? Let me know some of your favorites in the comments down below. We're going to go back to modern movies again with my 2025 quarterly report, looking at all the movies I watched from last quarter. If you're interested in that, please let me know down below, like and subscribe, and I'll see you then. Once again, keep those reels turning. Thank you.